Welcome. So our first presenter today is Blake Scholl, founder and CEO of Boom, who kindly is hosting this event this weekend. Prior to Boom, Blake worked at Amazon and Groupon until one day he thought, quote, that there's nothing like working on internet coupons to make you yearn to build something you truly love. Blake?
All right, thank you, Jose. I guess welcome to Boom, everybody. I am super thrilled and honored to be hosting this group here. I'd love to believe that we are making some progress here in overcoming some bottlenecks. And so the story of Supersonic Aviation is, it's definitely a huge bottleneck, but also of a path through. And so I don't know how that story will generalize. I'm very curious to see how that goes. But I hope you'll leave feeling inspired that these things that seem like they're big walls, you actually can find ways through. So let's jump in, starting with a brief history of speed. So let's talk about how speed has worked over the time that humans have existed. And I want to spend some time talking about why it matters, because even among people like us, who are very technology and progress forward, it's really easy to underappreciate how important it is. So we'll talk about why we didn't have it, what the bottlenecks are, the nature of the breakthrough that we have here, and I'd like to wrap by talking a bit about why I'm incredibly optimistic for the future. And I hope we'll have some time for Q&A and not just me talking. Okay, so in the 200,000 years that humans have walked on this planet, we've mostly just walked. And over most of that time period, your typical person would never venture more than 20 miles from their birthplace. And this went on literally for nearly 200,000 years. But in a very tiny sliver of recent history, we've made progress. And so if you go back to, say, the mid-1800s, you could get across the continent, but it would take like 6 months in a covered wagon. And of course, there was no such thing as like a round-trip ticket on the Oregon Trail. You didn't visit, you moved. But that all changed with the Transcontinental Railroad just a couple decades later, where you can now get across the continent in about 6 days. And for the first time, if you lived on the East Coast, you could actually visit California and come home. Huge change. Now, a few decades later, of course, we had the first airplane, and it was 30 years from the first airplane, which could barely carry one person and a few hundred feet, to a really practical airliner that many people could buy a ticket on and get around the country. And by the 1950s, we continued to progress. If you lived in San Francisco in the 1950s, you dreamed of, say, a vacation in Hawaii, you would get on one of these. That's right, it's a flying boat. And so San Francisco to Honolulu would take about 16, 17, 18 hours to get to Honolulu. And the result was you actually had to be very wealthy in order to travel, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of time. So if it takes 16, 17 hours to go someplace, you can't go for the weekend, maybe you don't even go for a week. And so very, very small numbers of people, for example, went to Hawaii before jets. And so to study exactly how speed really impacts us, the transition from the propeller age into the jet age is an amazing case study. So in 1958, we had the first jet airliners, and over the next about 10, 12 years, they got widely deployed. And it was the jet that made, for example, Hawaii a major tourist destination. We had a 6-fold increase in visits to Hawaii in the first 10 years of the jet age, and it kept on growing because second-order effects kicked in, and people started to build hotels and resorts and tourist attractions, and everywhere you looked, there was a big speed up. Travel, the flights got two to three times faster, but if you add up the total amount of time on airplanes, it actually went up dramatically because there were so many more possibilities in the world. So to tell a few more stories, it wasn't just about where you could go, it's about what could come to you. The Beatles had the first world tour in the 60s, something they could not have done with slower aircraft just a decade earlier. So why was music in the 60s starting to become an international phenomenon? The speed of the jet made it possible. It also impacted sports. For the first 75 years of Major League Baseball, it was just a northeastern U.S. thing because the teams had to be within a one-day train ride of each other. But within the first 6 months of transcontinental jet service, the Brooklyn Dodgers traveled across the country, they became the LA Dodgers. And again, sports spread coast to coast. So next time you enjoy the big game, remember to give thanks to the speed of the jet that made it possible. It was not possible before then. All kinds of other things happened that, again, you would never sit and imagine or predict from day one, like Nike. What does Nike have to do with jets? Well, it turns out that the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, I only discovered this like reading his memoirs, went to Japan on kind of a chance trip after business school. Again, late 1960s, he could do it thanks to the speed of the jet, and he fell in love with Japanese running shoes. And Nike got their start importing Japanese running shoes to the US, something that would not have been possible, again, without the speed of the jet. So by the end of the 1960s, we had just gone into the jet age, and everyone was incredibly excited about progress in aerospace. It seemed like we'd just gone through a revolution. We were on the cusp of a new revolution. Supersonic aircraft were promised, and they were supposed to be to the jet aircraft what the jet aircraft had been to the propeller aircraft before them. But we know this didn't really work out the way it was promised. In 1969, we did fly Concorde for the first time, twice as fast as the other aircraft at the time. And that same year, 1969, we put a man on the moon and brought him back safely. But as we stand here now, more than half a century later, if you want a supersonic civil aircraft or a lunar lander, you have to go to a museum. In fact, the only other place on the planet with a supersonic civil aircraft that's not a museum is this building. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. So what happened? And I think it helps to look back and say, where did progress come from in the first half century from the Wright brothers? And what changed and why didn't we have it after that? Well, if you look at the first major breakthroughs in civil aviation, so that everyone knows the Wright brothers built the first airplane. They were bicycle entrepreneurs. Why did they do it? Well, they thought it'd be really cool, and they're pretty sure there'd be a market for it somehow, one way or another, even if it's just entertainment. So they wanted to build something. They thought they could make money doing it. They thought there'd be some kind of commercial opportunity. The first practical airliner, the Douglas DC-3, was built by Douglas Aircraft while he was still running his company. Why? Well, he thought he could build an aircraft that a whole lot of people could buy tickets on and benefit from. And he thought he'd sell them to airlines in like tens of thousands of copies. And he was right. So with that commercial motivation, you have to have something that makes sense for passengers, that makes sense for airlines, that makes sense for the people building, developing, and investing in the airplane. And again, the same story with the first jetliner, the de Havilland Comet, built by a company where its founder was still the chairman. And the de Havilland Comet was not a commercial success. It was not a technical success. But the point is the same. We had entrepreneurs, we had commercial motivation, and things had to be thought through in an economically sustainable way. Okay, well, what happened with supersonics? Completely different story. So in the 1960s, there were 3 supersonic projects around the world. There was Concorde, which was a joint venture between the French and British governments. This was not a startup. This was not even an established company. There were no founders. It was established by treaty in 1962. So this is the height of the Cold War. And what was the motivation? Let's show that European technology can do something that the Soviets can't do. And it's honestly, it's remarkable it ever worked and flew. They couldn't decide what language they should write the documentation in, so it was in 2 languages. They couldn't decide where to put the factories, so it was like 2 factories for the price of 4. But it worked technically, and it was a technological marvel. Now you go to Soviet Russia, similar story. The Tu-144, very Concorde-like. Not as successful. They flew a couple passenger flights, carried around some mail, and then kind of shut it down. And then in the US, there was also a supersonic project. Boeing was building it, but it wasn't Boeing's idea to build it. It wasn't Boeing's motivation to build it. The FAA established a project to have a government-funded, government-specified supersonic airliner, and of course the Concorde and the Concordski were Mach 2, about 100-seat airplanes, and so we had to have a Concorde killer. So that was going to be Mach 3 and 300 seats, and none of these airplanes made any commercial sense. Once Congress pulled the funding for the Boeing supersonic transport, they didn't keep going with it because they knew it was more thud than boom. And the reason was, to think of 100-seat airplanes, but 1960s technology, they're incredibly expensive to operate. And today's money, a ticket on Concorde to set you back about 20 grand. And for all but a tiny number of people, that's not transportation. That's like a bucket list item. It's a thing you dream to do one day once. That we could fit in, count on one hand the number of people who are Concorde frequent flyers. And so none of these things were commercial successes. And that was because we switched our motivation. Instead of going through a process where we say we have to build something that makes sense as a product commercially, we did things instead for national prestige. And when you do things for national prestige, you can do technologically very impressive things. We put a man on the moon, we planted a flag, and then we didn't know what to do next. Same thing with supersonic. And then what happens is, so you've got this illusion of incredible progress. But then there's no actual path forward. It's actually a dead end. And then the fallout from that, just in rockets as in airplanes, led to a half century of no progress. So let's talk about how exactly that happened. Well, so we had the Soviets with Concorde, we had the Europeans with Concorde. In, I think it was 1970, Congress pulled the plug on the American supersonic competitor. It was over budget, behind schedule, all that good stuff. And within 6 months of that, there was a ban on supersonic flight over land in the US. There were serious efforts to block Concorde from being able to take off and land at US airports. And that ban on supersonic flight over land, it's still on the books today. It's one of the dumbest regulations ever written. Literally it says, thou shalt not exceed Mach 1. And ostensibly it was about sonic boom noise. But if you look at it carefully, why it was written the way it was, and if you talk to the people who were around at the time and what really happened, that was about protecting U.S. from perceived competition from Concorde. And so that ban exists today. And the failure of first-generation supersonic transport has led to some deeply entrenched false beliefs about high-speed travel. That going faster inherently costs more, that people won't pay for speed, the supersonic aircraft are noisy and they're too loud and they're unacceptable, that unless you can fly high speed over land, that there's not going to be a market for it, and that the supersonic flight is inherently environmentally unsustainable. So these are deeply, deeply entrenched. 7 years ago when I was starting Boom, this was like all you could find on the internet about why we don't have high-speed travel. And this stuff still goes on. Last week we announced that United is buying more Overture aircraft than Concorde's ever entered service, and yet you see this stuff all over the internet. There was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, last weekend propounding this stuff. And it's, the result of first-gen supersonics being really Concorde being the only example. People equate the entire field of supersonics with one airplane and then assume that the whole field has the problems of that one airplane. And it's as if in tech, we had stopped building computers after the UNIVAC, and then people are like, well, you couldn't possibly build a smartphone because the UNIVAC was so big and clunky and expensive. And it's total nonsense. And none of these things are true. They're all false. And it's actually not that hard to tell that they're false. It took me literally 2 weeks of research and starting Boom to realize that most of this just didn't need to be true. So if you remove the false steps of first-gen attempts at high speed, what would have happened? Well, this is my view. Supersonic would not have happened in the 60s with a large supersonic transport, but a few years later, and it was started with a small supersonic private jet. So this would be for people whose time is most valuable, who have the capability to pay to save time. And it would have been a small aircraft, maybe 5, 6, 7 seats, something like that. Those aircraft are technologically simpler to develop. They're cheaper to develop. The questions of noise are inherently easier to solve in small aircraft. One of the first order things that correlates to sonic boom intensity is just how heavy is the airplane. Small airplane, less heavy, less noise. So this would have worked. And then we would have had a small commercial aircraft, and then we would have a medium commercial aircraft, and then a larger one. And if this had developed, I deeply believe we'd all be going Mach 4 now, and it would cost less than we pay today for our subsonic flights. But what happened was we banned the business model for number one. We banned, think about the way most technologies come to market. They start at a high price point for a small number of users. Like think the first cell phones, think the first cars, think the first computers. Like that's the typical pattern. High price point, small market. We get economies of scale. We figured the cost out. Now our kids walk around with cell phones in their pocket. But we banned the thing that would start the whole thing. And so let me explain why exactly this was banned. So if you look at private jets, they spend about 75–80% of their time over land. And your typical owner of a private jet, they don't have like 5 of them. They've got one, and they want to use that everywhere they go. So the jet follows the owner around, and people have tried to put business cases together for supersonic private jets for a long time. Sadly, one of the companies working on that just went bankrupt a couple weeks ago. But the problem was, it's like 50% more expensive than a G6, 50% smaller than a G6. Not faster 80% of the time in real world usage. And just the market for that is so small that you can't overcome the development cost hurdles. And so you end up with this like chicken and egg problem. Maybe one day we could fly supersonic over land, and then we could build an aircraft that takes advantage of it, but no one's going to work on that problem until there's a market. You're stuck. And that's where we've been for decades. And so there would have been this natural flywheel that would have happened. So if you look back at what happened when we went from props to jets, there was, as we made flights faster, it made sense for a lot more people to go a lot more places more often. So speed leads to more demand. When there's more demand, you can then build a larger aircraft. When you build a larger aircraft, this is true subsonic, but it's even more true supersonic when you look at the physics. You can build a higher efficiency airplane. Higher efficiency airplane means you get more speed, you get more range, you get lower fares. And what do those things do? When you're faster, cheaper, can go further, well, that drives more travel demand. And so that gets a virtuous cycle going. This is the flywheel of speed that should have happened starting 50 years ago. And you overlay on top of that, when there's a market, people invest. And there's all kinds of technological innovation that would drive improvements in high speed, but there's no market, there's no investment, there's no nothing. And so we never really had this happen. So what impedes progress? What are the bottlenecks? We talked about some of this already. The deeply entrenched false beliefs, and what I've experienced is getting people who have lived through Concorde to understand that Concorde wasn't the only thing that supersonic could be is really hard. We've got this chicken and egg problem. Where, for example, there's technology that's talked about, like something called variable cycle motors. Variable cycle motors could probably make supersonic aircraft 30% more efficient. No one's working on them because there's no market for them. And then there's an innovator's dilemma situation, which is worth pausing on for a moment. People ask me a lot, okay, if supersonic's a good idea, why aren't Boeing and Airbus doing it? Well, how many people in the room have read The Innovator's Dilemma? Okay, awesome. I love that. So it's a classic situation where you have where the established players do not want to cannibalize their own markets, and they have to go after the biggest markets with the least risk. So Boeing, what are they building next? They're building a replacement aircraft for the 757s that they don't make anymore that are getting rusty out there in service, because they might sell a few thousand of them, and it's not going to do anything to threaten their bread and butter Dreamliner and 777 cells. And across the pond at Airbus, it's the same story. Like a rational Airbus and Boeing does not prioritize supersonic until it can be done in a way that doesn't threaten their core business. So they're not doing it. And we're talking about Boeing and Airbus, but that's all there is. There is no established player that has a place in the market where entering supersonic would make sense. So the established guys aren't going to do it. We talked about the speed limit. Speed limit prevents the natural first step business model from working. There are environmental regulations that prevent certain forms of disruptive innovation. What's that mean? Okay, so there are noise rules for takeoff and landing for subsonic airplanes. And if you go back to the 1960s, people say Concorde was loud, and it was loud. It wasn't that much louder than the Boeing 707. At the same time. But as we've made progress in subsonic airplanes, they do get quieter, the engines get better, and the way the regulations work is every time it becomes technologically feasible to make a quieter airplane, now there's a rule that's written that says, well, you got to meet that level for all new aircraft. It keeps ratcheting down. and ratcheting down and ratcheting down and ratcheting down. And it's not entirely unreasonable. If you can build airplanes that are going to rattle fewer windows and be more friendly to airport communities, like it kind of seems like that's a reasonable thing for you to go do. And in the context of subsonic aircraft, there's like really no trade-off. The things that make the airplane quieter around airport communities also make it more efficient. And to double click on the tech there for a moment, you may notice that the airplanes that we fly on today, the engines keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger around. And that's something called higher bypass ratio. There's a big fan on the front of the engine that basically blows air around the rest of the jet engine. And in today's aircraft, maybe like 15 times more air is blown around the jet engine than actually goes through it. That makes it quieter, and we could nerd out on this if you guys wanted, but it also makes the aircraft more energy efficient. And so efficiency and quiet for subsonic go together. There's no trade-off. But for supersonic, those things are in tension. You want basically a very skinny aircraft for high speed. You don't want a big fan. You want a little fan. And in fact, the higher speed you go, the smaller the ideal fan size goes, and eventually the fan goes away, and it's just a pure jet engine's the right answer. But those engines are louder. And so what's happened is we have this regulatory framework that is built around the expectation of subsonic aircraft getting quieter and quieter and quieter over time. But a supersonic aircraft, to kind of get out there to break through, would ideally be exempt from those things, just the way that the first subsonic jet aircraft were allowed to be noisy. And then that would kick off a flywheel of innovation, and ultimately, I believe we're going to have supersonic aircraft that are quieter than subsonic aircraft. But we have to get there. And the problem is the noise restrictions make it very, very hard to get a start. Some people have noticed that we reduced the target cruise speed for Overture from Mach 2.2 to Mach 1.7. We announced that's been done for a while, but we announced it last week. Why? This is why. Because if you try to go Mach 2.2 with an aircraft that's going to be as quiet as the latest standards say you have to be, you burn a whole lot of gas, the flight becomes unaffordable, and the business case falls apart. And so the point about disruptive innovation, so remember back to Christensen's book, disruptive innovation happens when the standard of the figure of merit, the standard by which performance is measured, changes. When you first do that, it's often worse by existing measures. And supersonic aircraft naturally come to market are better on speed, better on human performance, better on human efficiency, but left to their own devices, they start out louder. But we've banned the ability to go backwards on that measure. And that's only getting worse as we continue to kind of ratchet down the noise restrictions. And at least with current technology, that continues to put pressure on the highest speed that supersonic aircraft can economically achieve. The other thing that's happened, and boy, Chatham House rules on this one, please, because this is a very, very controversial thing to say. We've increased the safety and certification bar for aircraft. Flying is now by far the safest mode of transportation on the planet. I think it's now been like 10 years since there's been a single fatality on a US airline. Far, 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 far more people die in a car on their way to the airport than they do on airplanes. And in fact, crashes are so few and far between that they've become major news. Major news. And versus if you look at what we used to do in the 50s and 60s when we were making rapid progress, we took more risk. We took more risk for the test pilots, we took more risk for the passengers, and we were able to make more progress. And there was an analysis that I would love somebody to do, which is to look and say, because we were making slower progress in aviation, how many more people are driving instead of flying? Like think about the impact of putting the TSA in place after 9/11, where we put significant barriers to travel. Think about routes like Boston to New York, where before 9/11, that was a nice little shuttle flight. You go right into the airport, right onto the airplane, you get there, and then all of a sudden, when you might have half an hour with security nonsense, then you drive instead, and when you drive, you're far more likely to die. And I would bet that if you run the numbers, you'd find the TSA killed more people than the terrorists did because of effects like that. So this is a double-edged sword, right? How do we think about actually managing safety? How do we think about managing risk? There's a very high public expectation of it now, but the need to cross that bar on day one significantly impedes progress. Okay, so I think we all know that. I think we got to wade through some of this stuff. So let's talk about what we're actually doing at Boom and where I think the breakthrough is. So a few things have happened since Concorde was developed in the 1960s. We've had a serious increase in a volume of international travel, 7-fold increase since the 70s when Concorde was designed, a 2.5-fold increase since 2003 when it was shut down. At the same time, there's been incredible technological progress in the technology for building airplanes. So if you look since the 50s, we've changed basically everything about how you design and build airplanes, except the one thing passengers care about, which is how fast they fly. So we've gone from aluminum to carbon fiber composites. We've gone from converted military loud afterburning turbojet engines to clean, quiet, efficient turbofan engines. We've gone from designing aircraft with slide rules and wind tunnels and drafting paper to be able to do computer design and optimization. I think Overture is the first airplane that's will fly in the cloud, fly in the clouds, and it was designed in the cloud, optimized in the cloud. And so what we're doing at Boom is kind of two things that unstick this. One is we are starting out by leveraging only technologies that have been proven safe, reliable, and efficient on other aircraft. If it's not something the FAA knows how to approve, it's not on the airplane. And so there's a whole lot of really cool stuff we'd love to do that we're not doing in Overture 1 because it would put too much risk for a startup to go pursue it. So that's thing one. So we're collecting all these other little bits of technology, and it turns out when you add them up into a new design, you can actually leapfrog over what would have been the natural first supersonic product. We leapfrog over the supersonic private jet, and we go straight to market step number 2, a small commercial product. And so let's talk through how that works. So if you look at the economic anatomy of international air travel, about 20% of seats at the front of the airplane, so business class and first class, so think flying beds, represent more than half of international airline revenue and about 80% of the operating profit. These are the public numbers. When we showed it to United, they said, you're wrong, it's more significant than that. So these are the passengers who are already today paying top dollar for a flying bed because they hate the flights are so long. And so what we're going to do is chop off basically the profitable part of a Boeing or Airbus and make it go really fast. And so that's what Overture is, the fastest and the most sustainable airliner. And we think this is the first one that's really ready for mass market adoption. And why is that? Well, most importantly, that $20,000 ticket on Concorde, you got to get the operating costs down. And thanks to improving the fuel efficiency on the airplane, and quite frankly, getting some economies of scale by right sizing the airplane, this cost per seat mile is going to be about 3/4 less than Concorde. And so, what's a quarter of $20,000? It's $5,000, i.e., it's about what people are already paying in subsonic business class today. So, for the same cost as getting there in 7 hours, you get there in 3.5 hours. We can also meet all existing noise and emission standards on this airplane. Not free, but we can do it. And we can build an airplane that works with existing airports, runways, gates. Like I said before, every technology on the airplane has some kind of a certification precedent. So, we don't have to show up to the FAA and convince them to do something they've never done before. And also, you can make a big leap forward in sustainability. So this is the first airplane from the designed from the ground up to run on 100% sustainable aviation fuel and can be completely carbon neutral. I'll come back and talk a little bit about how that works. So one of the myths was you can't get a good market without supersonic flight over land, and it turns out it's just not true. I'll tell my personal story about this. It was July of 2014. My family and I were on vacation in Hawaii, and the kids and my wife are splashing on the pool, and I'm at my desk screen scraping FlightAware, pulling down global traffic data and building a little spreadsheet that would look at how many passengers are on routes where you can give a big speed up while flying subsonic over land and supersonic over water. And it turns out there's a lot. And especially if you optimize the flight paths, and this is the thing that was counterintuitive to a lot of people. If you bend the flight paths for more time over water, less time over land, you're flying more miles, but you can fly fewer minutes. and that thing alone about triples the applicable market for supersonic. So there are about 400 city pairs on the planet that are ready with an airplane that's twice as fast over water, about 20% faster over land, kind of right under the speed of sound. And if you say, well, how many people fly business class today? So our market, people are already paying the $5,000 ticket on these routes. By 2030, it's going to be about 58 million passengers per year. How many, that's just in organic growth, not assuming any effects of speed. How many 65-seat airplanes do you need to carry those passengers? It's simple math. It's about 1,200 airplanes. So well over a $200 billion market for us building these jets. To put that in context in aviation, that's in dollars more significant than the 787, and in units about the same. So this is a totally mainstream kind of market opportunity. So how do we end up selecting those city pairs, and what do we mean that there's time saved? Yeah, so there's some criteria. Starting with all routes on the planet, like about 67,000 routes. We filtered for, it's got to be long enough subsonic that speeding up is worth it. And I think we used a 3-hour threshold there. So like, LA to San Francisco, by the time you break the sound barrier, it's time to put the brakes on and land. Doesn't make any sense. At least 25% or 2.5 hours savings. So enough that it's meaningful. Saving 5 minutes is not worth it, right? And then we filtered only for the routes that have enough traffic to fill an airplane every day. So there's some that are thin, but you wouldn't actually fly on them. So I think this is actually pretty realistic. Is the restriction U.S. or worldwide? It's U.S. and Canada very clearly on the books. Elsewhere in the world, it is governed by an ICAO regulation. ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization. It's like a part of the UN. And what those regulations say is you cannot create an unacceptable situation on the ground. And no one knows what the heck that means. But it's widely taken as a banned worldwide. Now, there was the possibility of supersonic corridors. Canada had them for Concorde. Australia has announced they're going to have supersonic corridors between Sydney and Perth. Kansas recently said they're going to have a supersonic corridor, but you can't really get from San Francisco to DC just with Kansas. We need more than that. But it's de facto international, and you can't. This goes back to the banning of the business model. Could you, unacceptable situation on the ground, is that a loophole big enough you could fly an airplane through it? Maybe. Is it a loophole big enough you could raise billions of dollars betting on that? No. Because everyone perceives risk. No one wants to invest in the face of that risk. So what happens if you break the rule? I've wondered this too. And so, back in the day, I dreamed of like an Uber-like strategy for this, where it's like, sorry, the throttle got stuck open. And by the way, maybe no one actually noticed on the ground. But again, you can't build a business model based on that because everyone's going to perceive risk. Like, imagine if the Uber pitch was, we need billions of dollars, and our whole model predicates on like defeating the taxi laws. Like, no one invests. You have to have a business model where that risk doesn't exist. Now that said, couldn't you actually do it? I think when you can get from San Francisco to Tokyo in 4.5 hours, but getting to DC is going to take more than that on a subsonic airplane. A lot of people are going to say, what is that sonic boom thing? Can I hear one? And like that's the reason that we have to, spend 6 hours in the back of the bus. The rules will get changed. There'll be corridors. There'll be second generation aircraft. But one thing I should say about Overture 1 is we're not designing it for a quiet sonic boom. It's going to be about as loud as Concorde was, which is still, you're going to hear it. It's not going to break windows. If you fly supersonic 50 feet over, there's a great Mythbusters episode about this, where they tried to break a window using a sonic boom. And it turns out if you fly 50 feet over the ground and you put the boom like right smack dab in the middle of the window, you can do it. But if we fly Overture supersonic 50 feet over the ground, we've got a bigger problem than broken windows. So no one knows how quiet you have to be able to fly supersonic over land. There's no noise standard, and so no one's designed the airplane for it. Top speed of the jet and how high does it fly? So Overture 1 is Mach 1.7 long-range cruise. The peak speed will be a little bit higher than that, but 1.7 is where you're really going to fly it, and that is twice as fast as the fastest airliner today. And I'll talk about flight times, but I think that the important thing about speed is not like, it's this many miles per hour or this Mach number or whatever. It's what does it let you do? How does it fit into your day? And I'll come back and talk a little bit about that. How high? 60,000 feet peak. So the high speed lanes are going to be above the low speed lanes, kind of same as Concorde. So critical path runs through XB1. Why not make it a drone? If I had to do it, it would be a drone. So back when we made the decision to build XB1, and so I want to make sure everyone knows, XB1 is the airplane on the other side of this hangar. It's the 1/3 scale human piloted version of Overture. Back when we first started, we thought we'd get it built for $15 million in like 18 months. We were wrong. We spent 10 times on that. And I used to feel really bad about that. And then I realized if you say we built a supersonic airplane for only $150 million, people are really impressed. But if I'm being honest, like I'm lucky Boom survived that decision. It was a really bad decision. And we made it at the time because the folks we consulted on this, and the best advice I got was if you go to a drone, you're going to get an expensive, complicated fly-by-wire flight control system. We costed that out, concluded it was going to cost more than the rest of the whole airplane, and therefore it was going to be better to put a pilot in it versus trying to build a machine that could do it. That's baloney. That's wrong. I know that now. But here we are, so we're going to take all the credit we can for having built a human-piloted aircraft and all the safety technology for that. So we're going to get our lemonade, but there will likely be an XB2. XB2 will not be human-piloted. And XB2 will be the technology proof of concept for the technology for Overture 2, which we're kind of starting to think about, but it's very, very early days. It's like me and one guy thinking about that. Okay, so let's talk about speed. So the way that I've learned to talk about speed is not focusing on the Mach numbers and the miles per hour, but on the flight times and how it fits in people's lives. So today, New York to London, you do that typically as an overnight flight. It's 7 hours. You leave in the evening, you get there in the morning. It's you're bleary-eyed. When that goes to 3.5 hours, what you can do instead is sleep in your own bed the night before you have to leave, get up in the morning, first flight from New York with the time difference working against you. You get to London in time for a late afternoon meeting, including all the ground travel time. You can go out to dinner if you want and come back that same night and tuck your kids into bed. So you can actually do a practical day trip across the Atlantic. And no matter how long you stay, if you look at round trip itineraries, you save 1 calendar day. It's not 3.5 hours that you save a day. Across the Pacific, you actually save 2 days. So I think folks know that Japan Airlines was our first pre-order customer for Overture. And so I went to Tokyo a lot to do that deal, and it was worth going to Tokyo for one freaking meeting. And what is that? How do you do that? If you got a Monday morning meeting in Tokyo, you leave the U.S. midday Saturday. The flight's 12 hours. You get there end of day Sunday, Japan time. You go to a hotel. You try to sleep in the hotel room. Your alarm goes off the next morning. You drag yourself out of bed, and you try not to sleep in your meeting. And then you catch a flight back. The whole thing takes a minimum of 3 calendar days. And you'd better not make any important decisions the rest of the week because you're so fucked up from the jet lag. But with Supersonic, it's really different. You leave a whole day later. Instead of Saturday, you leave Sunday. An 8 a.m. Flight from San Francisco to Tokyo gets to Tokyo around 8:30, 9 a.m. Tokyo time Monday morning. So they're awake. To you, it's Sunday afternoon, so you're awake. You can do a whole day of meetings, catch an overnight flight back. You're back in the U.S. 24 hours after you left, and you don't have jet lag. Because the biggest thing that causes jet lag is switching time zones. 2 days faster. One other example, LA to Sydney. Today, this is like a flight that people dread, right? Like who wants to do 14.5 hours on an airplane? It's super freaking painful. It's like Hawaii before jets. That's what Sydney is today. And we're turning Sydney into, no offense to my Australian friends, we're turning Sydney into Honolulu. With Overture. And so just think about the second order effects of that. Safety. So someone asked about XB1 and why it's human piloted. We're gonna milk that for all we can. We've built a lot of safety technology and know-how and safety culture into XB1. And so this turns out to be, there's the technology in the airplane and the design approaches, but one of the things I've learned is safety culture is actually the harder and more important thing to build. It's very easy for people to think you only care about schedule when you care about safety tremendously, and it's easy for people not to feel comfortable speaking up when there's a problem. They think for some reason, they believe that you don't actually want to know unless you really convince them that you do. And so building that into the culture at Boom has been a big deal. Building kind of the safety management system, the anonymous reporting system when people see problems, making sure they always feel heard when they deliver things like, hey, there's a problem, we need to take time and fix it. So that's been a big deal on XB1. And then Overture, we get to design that as the first post-pandemic airliner. And we've got some inherent advantages, right? If people don't want to spend time on airplanes, Better to spend less time on airplanes. Long, skinny jet, no middle seats anywhere in the airplane. That's definitely better. No middle seats to block out. And we're going to look at cabin aerodynamics and air purification and just make it such that if someone in row 3 sneezes, the person in row 2 doesn't have to be concerned. And last but not least, sustainability. So and this goes a little bit to, I think, some of the positive value we can create. Also a little bit to the point we were talking about earlier about how the ratcheting up of certain kinds of regulations prevents disruptive innovation. So if supersonic aircraft were required to meet the same CO2 standards that are about to be put in place for subsonic, you'd be toast. You couldn't do it. You'd be off by like a factor of 3. But the reason, the way we can continue to actually make progress here and really even be able to raise the bar on sustainability is because there's a new generation of jet fuels called Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF. And this is, it's liquid hydrocarbons, but it's not built from fossil fuels. And so there are a handful of ways to get this stuff. That they all effectively involve removing carbon from the atmosphere, liquefying it, and then you put it in the airplane, you burn it, and the carbon goes right back where you got it to begin with. So biofuels are one way of doing this. Like you can think of like plants as a machine for fixing carbon out of the atmosphere. There are machines that can do this. This stuff is working in small scale today. And current airplanes are allowed to fly on up to 50% SAF. And Overture, we're designing to run 100% SAF. And there's no like magic in that. You just have to decide you're going to do it and you use the right materials. Traditional fossil fuel jet fuel has effectively, it's got impurities in it. It's got something called aromatics, and jet engines and fuel systems, the seals and whatnot that expect the aromatics to help them keep them like lubricated and supple. But if you've got a more pure fuel that doesn't have them, you need to use different materials, so that's not hard to do. We'll do it. And it turns out that when you run on 100% SAF, you can actually improve the performance of the aircraft. So we ran XB1's engines on one of the highest blends of SAF ever used. We actually got better performance on the SAF than we got on fossil fuels. So there's a lot of work to be done to actually deliver on this. That's about scaling the production of SAF, and it's about making SAF economical, because today it's more expensive. But there's a lot of reason to believe that's going to change, and that there's some emerging SAF technologies that are actually going to beat fossil fuels on cost of production, like up at 60,000 feet, drier atmosphere, fewer contrails. There's actually a reason to believe that run on SAF, you're going to have fewer contrails as well. Ozone impacts. That's another one of the reasons why we went from 2.2 to 1.7, because while we're certified at 60,000 feet, same as Concorde, you can actually spend a lot of the flight a little bit lower, not put any NOx in the stratosphere. And like, again, theoretically, that's better. I've seen papers that say that actually high altitude NOx emissions helps the ozone layer. It's controversial. I wouldn't want to bet on it being one way or the other. So how much of the adoption of SAF is to avoid pushback versus genuine belief that it's better? Again, man, Chatham House rules on this one. It started out because it became very clear politically that if the narrative on supersonics was burns more fuel, emits more CO2, we were going to have a really, really, really hard time bringing it to market. And so you kind of have to do this unless you're fighting a very, very uphill battle. Yeah, but then the more I learned, the more I'm like, actually, there's some real merit here. Especially if you believe the scale economics of power to liquid. So that there are 3 principal ways to build SAF. There's biofuels. There is municipal waste-based, meaning like converted trash. And then there's power to liquid, which is like you fix carbon out of the atmosphere, you get some hydrogen out of maybe water, liquefy it. The biofuel stuff doesn't scale. The trash stuff, people get very excited about it, but there's not enough trash on the planet to power aviation. But the power to liquid stuff is infinitely scalable if you get the unit economics to be good, and there's reason to believe the unit economics can actually be very good, especially if you can get down electricity costs. That happens, then you get this really exciting world where we don't have to worry about how much, looking forward to the next talk, is that if the energy is plentiful and cheap, then you can not worry about the energy consumption of the aircraft from an environmental perspective. You only worry about it from an economic perspective. Make the economics work, then you can go do a lot of things for a lot of people. You can drive down the cost of supersonic. Is anyone flying with 100% SAF today? Yes. Airbus and Rolls-Royce recently did a demo where they flew an A350 on 100% SAF. This is not hard to do. It's literally use the right materials. There's no unobtainium, nothing crazy. You just have to decide to do it from day one, and you can't retrofit it because it's like, let's go change every seal and gasket in the airplane. All right, well, let's go supersonic through some of the rest of this. So on board the airplane, people remember Concorde is uncomfortable. We can do a lot better. Large seat, big screen, large window, can see the view of 60,000 feet. I was in San Francisco yesterday at the design lab where we're actually mocking up the cabin. It's really freaking cool. It's going to be like nothing else in the sky. It's going to be way better than this. Airline economics, I won't spend too much time on this, but unlike Concorde, this is going to be a flying mint. Why? Because we take the most profitable passengers, we give them a product that research says they will pay more for, but it's got the same cost structure as what they're flying today. And because the airplane's faster, you can do maybe three quarters more flights with the same airplane and crew. And this is the thing I call the speed dividend. You go faster. Your main challenge is the cost of the energy that you use. But because you go faster, all the other costs naturally come down. Maintenance is proportional to hours, not miles. Pilot costs, even rent on the airplane, even catering. You can't drink as much champagne on a short flight as you would on a long one. So you add all this up, like Overture is about double the profitability of the most efficient subsonic airliner you can buy today. And I guess I should mention our own unit economics, that this is an airplane that we can sell for $200 million a copy. We've never discounted it. But because it's made out of the same stuff as a 787, but less of it, it's pretty darn cheap to build. So we're going to have incredible gross margins on this product. And the airlines are going to have some good gross margins too. Okay, someone was asking earlier about the political support and who kind of fights for this and against this. Supersonic has become like the only thing that's bipartisan in DC. It's really incredible. So it's no secret that the last administration supported it. In April, Biden came out in favor of supersonic. I testified about a month ago in front of the House Aviation Subcommittee, and across the aisle, everyone's in favor of it. I mean, why is that? I think it's a few things. One is we have carefully engineered, I mean, it's true, but we also carefully engineer our storytelling such that from every political perspective, there's something to be excited about. And from no perspective is there something to be unhappy about. So, if you're on the right, this is American innovation, this is jobs, this is technological progress, this is a new capability that's pretty exciting. If you are more on the left, this is no net new noise. This is a leap forward in sustainability. This is something that's about human connection, about bringing the planet closer together. And by the way, that ability to tell the story on speed and why it matters from a human perspective, I think is like part of the Boom secret sauce. Before Boom, the conversation around that was like, leaders arrive first, and less time on airplanes is better. And it just completely underappreciates it. Speed is the difference from being able to go or not go. The difference to who you can fall in love with. It's really important. So there's bipartisan political support, and right now politically, no one's really fighting against it. Hopefully it stays that way. So where we are today, XB1 is going to fly into this year, early next year. You guys get to see that a little bit later. And Overture will be in the air in 5 years, and passengers before the end of the decade. But coming to talk about the future here a little bit, my aim is to, so if you think back to that flywheel we talked about earlier that never got started, we're going to start that flywheel. And there's a future family of aircraft here which get progressively larger, longer range, faster, and more affordable. And that speed dividend we're talking about is going to kick in. And the fastest flight's going to be the most affordable one. That's if that sounds miraculous today, remember it already happened when we went from props to jets. The first jets were more expensive, but we don't have that propeller flight to Hawaii anymore because we figured out how to make the jets efficiently efficient, and the speed dividend kicked in. And so technology is when it goes in S curves, and it's subsonic. We're at the tail end of that S curve. Like another 1% improvement in a subsonic airplane is very, very difficult to get. But supersonics in diapers, and there's low-hanging fruit here out the wazoo. When we allow ourselves to actually do some technical innovation, which we're going to do in Overture 2, boy, this gets better quickly. And so my goal is for supersonic is going to be the main mode of transportation over long distances, and I'd like to position Boom to be the company that provides those airplanes. To step back for just a moment, all of this leaves me feeling very, very optimistic. And when I was starting Boom 7 years ago, like, I had no idea whether this was possible. I had very much no idea whether, this guy from Groupon could somehow make any of this happen. I thought the answer was probably no, but the only way to know is to try anyway and see what can happen. And it seems like it's working. Like, there's a lot of challenge ahead of us, a lot of reasons this could still not work. But there's also a lot of challenge in the rearview mirror that's already been overcome. It leaves me very, very optimistic that when you study a problem carefully, that no one has studied carefully for a long period of time, and you look at it from a fresh perspective, you can discover a lot of false conventional wisdom, or you can discover things that maybe used to be true that are no longer true. And coming in from fresh eyes, you can often be first to realize that. So I hope this is inspiring. I hope we'll finish overcoming these bottlenecks, and I hope we'll crush some more bottlenecks elsewhere.